April 3rd, 1945. 21:10 hours. A shattered railway yard outside Osnabrück, Western Germany. The smoke hasn't cleared from the afternoon bombing. Freight cars lie twisted along the tracks like broken ribs. Somewhere in the darkness, artillery still mutters, distant but constant. Karl Brenner presses himself against the cold steel of an overturned wagon, clutching a rifle with 3 rounds left. He is 19 years old. 2 weeks ago, he was a mechanic's apprentice. Now he wears the gray-green uniform of a collapsing army. They had told him the Americans were savages, that they shot prisoners, that they chewed gum while cities burned, that if captured, he would be beaten, starved, humiliated. A flare goes up. The yard turns white. Raus. Handhawk. The voice isn't German. Karl drops the rifle. Boots crunch over gravel. A helmeted figure looms in front of him. Rifle steady, eyes unreadable beneath the brim. Karl raises his hands, waiting for the blow. It doesn't come. Instead, the American soldier jerks his head toward a growing line of disarmed Germans and says, in heavily accented German, "Go. Over there." Karl stumbles into line. No one hits him. No one spits. He doesn't understand. If you're drawn to the human stories buried inside the collapse of empires, the quiet moments where history turns not with explosions but with choices, stay with me. Because this is one of those stories. By the spring of 1945, more than 5 million German soldiers would fall into Allied captivity. In the West, hundreds of thousands surrendered to American forces. Many expected revenge. Many have been told to expect nothing less. Karl had grown up on speeches broadcast over crackling radios. He had watched newsreels in crowded cinemas showing American soldiers portrayed as crude, undisciplined, morally weak. He believed it. Most did. It was easier than doubt. Now doubt was all he had. The Americans marched them to a temporary holding area, a barbed wire enclosure hastily erected near the rail yard. Floodlights glare down. Guards pace the perimeter. Karl braces himself for interrogation. Instead, a medic moves down the line. Wounded, the medic asks in English, then repeats in simple German. A man ahead of Karl raises a trembling hand. Blood seeps through a bandage wrapped poorly around his thigh. The medic kneels immediately, cutting away the filthy cloth and replacing it with clean gauze. He works quickly, professionally, not once striking the man or mocking him. Karl feels something shift inside him. When the medic reaches him, he hesitates. Karl shakes his head. No wounds. The medic studies his face for a second longer than necessary, then pulls a small packet from his satchel and presses it into Karl's hand. Crackers. Hard, dry, real food. Karl hasn't tasted proper bread in weeks. He stares at the packet as if it's a trick. Eat, the medic says simply. He does. The first night is cold. They sleep on bare ground inside the wire. There is no comfort, no illusion of freedom. But there is also no random cruelty. No beatings in the dark. At dawn, trucks arrive. They are transported to a larger prisoner of war camp along the Rhine, one of many temporary enclosures established in the chaotic final weeks of the war. Conditions are rough. Overcrowded. Supplies stretch thin. But there is order. Names are taken. Ranks recorded. Units listed. When Karl gives his name, the American clerk writes it down carefully, as if it matters. It strikes him that the clerk is about his age. This was the first fracture in the story he had been told. Days blur into routine. Roll call at sunrise. Distribution of rations, canned meat, powdered soup, bread when available. Water from large tanks hauled in daily. Medical inspections for disease. Karl expects insults. Instead, he hears boredom. Complaints about baseball scores. Arguments about who will be shipped home first. The guards do not pretend to like them, but they do not treat them like animals either. One afternoon, Carl watches an American sergeant break up a scuffle between two German prisoners arguing over a blanket. The sergeant separates them and says, "Cut it out. You're done fighting." Done fighting. The words echo. He had never imagined someone from the enemy's side declaring the war finished so plainly. In May, news spreads through the camp before it is officially announced. Berlin has fallen. Hitler is dead. The war in Europe is over. Some prisoners weep openly. Others sit in stunned silence. Carl feels hollow. He had believed in final victory, in miracle weapons, in secret plans that would turn the tide at the last moment. Instead, there is wire, mud, and the steady hum of American trucks delivering supplies. A week after Germany's surrender, the camp commandant gathers a large group of prisoners near a makeshift wooden platform. An interpreter stands beside him. "You are now prisoners of war under the protection of the United States Army," the commandant says. "You'll be treated according to international law. If you cooperate, you will be fed and housed. You will work. You will not be harmed." Carl waits for the threat at the end. It doesn't come. Work details begin soon after. Under guard, groups of prisoners are taken to nearby farms and towns damaged by fighting. They clear debris, repair roads, bury the dead where necessary. Carl is assigned to a bridge reconstruction crew. The bridge spans a narrow river, partially destroyed by retreating German engineers weeks earlier. Now German prisoners rebuild what they themselves had blown apart. The American engineer supervising the project introduces himself simply as Lieutenant Harris. He speaks no German beyond a handful of phrases. Carl speaks limited English. Yet somehow, through gestures and shared labor, they communicate. One afternoon, Carl misjudges the placement of a timber beam. It slips, nearly crushing another prisoner's foot. Carl freezes, expecting fury. Lieutenant Harris steps forward, examines the beam, then calmly demonstrates the correct positioning. He makes Carl repeat the process until it's secure. "No rush," Harris says. "Do it right. No shouting. No humiliation." Carl cannot reconcile this with the caricature of Americans he had absorbed since childhood. Evenings in the camp bring something more unsettling. Re-education sessions. At first, the prisoners resist. They expect propaganda. Instead, they are shown films. Footage from liberated concentration camps. The images are grainy, but unmistakable. Emaciated bodies. Mass graves. Survivors with eyes too large for their faces. The room is silent except for the whir of the projector. Carl feels his stomach twist. He had heard whispers, but the official narrative had dismissed them as lies. When the lights come up, an American officer speaks quietly. "This was done in your name." There is no shouting. No collective punishment. Just that statement. Some prisoners argue afterward. It's staged. It's exaggerated. Carl says nothing. He remembers a Jewish shopkeeper from his hometown who disappeared in 1942. He remembers not asking where the man went. That night, he lies awake under a thin blanket and realizes that obedience had been easier than curiosity. Weeks turn into months. Food improves slightly as supply lines stabilize. Red Cross parcels arrive occasionally. Letters from home are allowed once mail routes reopen. Carl receives one in August. His mother survived the bombing of their neighborhood. His father did not. He reads the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it inside his jacket. The next morning, Lieutenant Harris notices his red eyes. Bad news. Harris asks gently. Carl nods. Harris hesitates, then offers a cigarette. They stand together near the half-rebuilt bridge, smoking in silence. Two former enemies, bound by loss. That moment unsettles Karl more than anything else. Hatred would have been simpler. By early 1946, policies shift. Prisoners with clean records and no ties to war crimes are evaluated for early release or transfer to labor programs in France and Britain, where manpower shortages are severe. Karl is transferred to an agricultural program in eastern England. He arrives at a modest farm owned by the Whittaker family, Thomas and Eleanor, both in their 50s. Their eldest son died in Normandy in 1944. Karl learns this on his first day. Thomas Whittaker studies him for a long moment before handing him a shovel. "Fields won't plow themselves," he says. "The work is relentless." From dawn until dusk, Karl digs drainage ditches, repairs fences, tends livestock. He sleeps in a small outbuilding under supervision, but without chains. Meals are eaten at a long wooden table in the farmhouse kitchen. The first time Eleanor places a bowl of stew in front of him, Karl can barely meet her eyes. She says nothing about her son. One evening, as rain lashes the windows, Thomas finally speaks. He was 21, Thomas says quietly. Didn't get the chance to learn farming properly. Karl swallows hard. "I am sorry," he manages. Thomas nods once. "War took plenty from all of us. Not accusation, not forgiveness, just fact. Over time, something unexpected grows. Not friendship exactly, but familiarity. Routine. Shared labor." Karl teaches Eleanor a German recipe for potato pancakes using scarce ingredients. She laughs at his accent when he attempts English idioms. Letters from his mother become more hopeful. Germany is rebuilding slowly. In late 1947, Karl is offered repatriation. He stands in the Whittaker field at sunset, staring at the horizon. Going home means rubble and memory. Staying means building a life in the country he once believed to be decadent and weak. Thomas finds him there. "You'll do what you need to," Thomas says. "Just make sure it's your choice this time. Your choice." That is what the war had stolen first, the illusion of choice replaced by orders, slogans, fear. Karl chooses to return to Germany, not because he hates England, not because he cannot imagine staying, but because rebuilding his homeland feels like a responsibility he can no longer ignore. On the morning he leaves, Eleanor presses a small parcel into his hands. Bread for the journey. Real bread. Thomas shakes his hand firmly. "No more fighting," Thomas says. "No more," Karl agrees. Years later, in 1965, Karl will tell his own son about captivity. "Were you afraid?" the boy asks. "Yes," Karl says. "But not of what I expected." He explains how the most powerful moment was not surrender, not the wire, not the hunger. It was the cigarette offered beside a half-built bridge. It was the bowl of stew placed on a table by a mother who had every reason to hate him. It was being treated as human when he had been taught to see others as less. He tells his son that strength is not loud. It does not always wear medals. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like rebuilding what you could easily leave broken. The war ended with signatures and parades. But for Karl, it truly ended the day he realized that the enemy did not become monstrous in victory. Because that forced him to confront something harder than defeat. It forced him to confront himself. If this story changed how you see the end of the Second World War, even slightly, remember that history is not only battles and leaders. It is also small decisions made by ordinary people under extraordinary pressure. And sometimes, the most decisive weapon in any war is the simple refusal to surrender your humanity.